What's up, YouTube? It's your boy JP's on the keys, and it's too easy about the video. We're back with another video today. I've gotten a lot of recommendations for this video in my comment section. The loss of life in World War I visualized. If you know, I did do a the Fallen of World War II video. I did that. You know what I'm saying? That video's getting a lot of views. Definitely go ahead and check that out if you didn't watch that. I'll probably have a card up there in the description somewhere up in the screen if you haven't seen that. But we shall look at World War I.
This video is made possible by Skillshare. Learn anything you want to learn with Skillshare for free for 2 months at skl.sh/reallifelore18. I purposefully released this video on the 9th of November 2018. 2 days from now, on the 11th of November, will mark exactly 100 years since the end of the First World War, one of the most destructive and violent wars ever fought in human history. While the Second World War and the destruction it caused often overshadow the First World War, I felt like now would be a good time to remember and visualize the enormous loss of life that the Great War caused. We'll be counting soldiers and civilians separately, as well as deaths and injuries separately. A casualty can be a confusing statistic in war because it means that a soldier has been taken out of action, but not necessarily killed. Each of these models represents 1,000 people who died or went missing, while each of these models represents 1,000 people who were injured, which when combined equal the number of casualties. And we'll begin the counting with the United States. Over 116,000 soldiers died, and another 204,000 were injured fighting against the Germans and Austrians on the Western Front. This amounted to 0.17% of the American population at the time becoming a casualty of war. America only fought for a little over a year between 1917 and 1918. The war had already been going on for over 2.5 years before that. So let's take a look at some of the countries who were fighting from the beginning. The war began when Austria-Hungary declared war against Serbia in 1914, and Serbia suffered worse than any other country during the war. 375,000 Serb soldiers lost their lives in the fighting, while another 625,000 civilians died from famine and disease. That amounted to over 22% of the Serbian population died.
Wow, so basically, one fifth of the population was affected by this war. That's over, you said 375 plus 625. That's a little bit over 1 million casualties. Almost over 1 million casualties for one country. All because of the assassination of, what was his name? Franz Ferdinand, of like the high ranking political member. I forgot what his title was, but I know the murder of Franz Ferdinand really set everything off. Like that was the catalyst for Austria declaring war on Serbia, you know.
Dying during the 4-year-long war. More than 1 out of every 5 people in the country. Serbia was a member of one of the 2 alliances that fought against one another in the war called the Entente, which also included the United Kingdom, France, Russia, Italy, America, and many others, all of whom would suffer terribly. The United Kingdom would send over 815,000 soldiers to their graves, like on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, in which 19,000 would die in only 24 hours, the bloodiest single day in British history.
800,000 men died. You gotta think about how many. You gotta think about how many generations. Like how many generations were stopped because of that. You gotta think about it. Let's say they are going off to war at 19, 18, 19, 20, 21. They have no chance when they die in war. They don't have any chance to have a son or they don't have a chance to have a son or have a child. And now your bloodline is lost unless you have some brothers, but the bloodline is lost. You got a whole bunch of widowers in the country. And then the people most of the people that are like hurt. Okay, you fought. Okay, sometimes you realize, like, what did you really fight for? Like, I understand that this was a worldwide effort, but a lot of these soldiers, they didn't. A lot of these soldiers didn't really know what they were fighting for. They thought that it was the patriotic thing to do. They thought that it was the right thing to do as a man. If you didn't fight in the war, then you weren't really a man. And back, especially in those days where it wasn't as many like economic opportunities available, it wasn't as many jobs as it is now. It wasn't as many things to do. Where you either gonna work in a factory, you gonna work in a factory, you gonna work in a factory, you gonna go to war. What else are you gonna do? Like what was the biggest? What were the jobs in the early 1900s? Factory work, construction. Like there was not that many avenues of like business unless you knew somebody that knew somebody that knew somebody that could get you into somebody's door, or unless you were part of like a mafia or something. Like it wasn't really that much opportunity for money.
Over 123,000 British civilians also lost their lives during the war, totaling up to just over 2% of the British population, or about 1 in every 50 people dying. But many more were wounded. 1,675,000 more soldiers, which adds together to 5.77% of the UK population then, becoming casualties of the war. Subjects of the British Empire like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, India, and South Africa also fought in the war and took high casualties.
I know somebody was like, "Oh, how did you not?" I didn't know that Australia was a British territory. I didn't know. I just saw the Union Jack in the flag, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't know it must have been a British territory." I didn't know. I mean, I could have guessed with Canada because like British Columbia, that should have rang a bell in my head. Like, yeah.
Percentage-wise, New Zealand.
And plus, New Zealand's flag New Zealand's flag now looks like the Union Jack pretty close to anyway. So I can kind of assume
suffered the worst, losing 3.8% of her population as wartime casualties. While numbers-wise, Australia took the hardest hit, losing over 61,000 of her soldiers and suffering another 152,000 wounded, with Canada and India both not too far behind. But the other major Entente powers lost an incredible amount more. The Italians joined the war in 1915, but in 3 years of fighting suffered 555,000 military fatalities, along with 592,000 civilian deaths. Another 947,000 Italian soldiers became wounded, representing 5.8% of the Italian population becoming casualties, a figure roughly comparable to the UK percentage. But then there's Russia and France, both of whom suffered higher casualties than the entire Serbian population combined during the war. Russia was the first country to come to Serbia's defense during the war and suffered catastrophic losses. 1,977,000 soldiers died fighting against the Central Powers, while another 1,140,000 civilians lost their lives. But Russia suffered vastly higher injuries. 4,350,000 soldiers were wounded during the fighting, which together represents 2.5% of the Russian population that became casualties.
6 million casualties. That's just ridiculous. How did Russia even know that coming to the aid of little old Serbia would cause them to lose that many people? Because even if, okay, you might not count a casualty as a death, but you got to think when you come back, what can you do? Because most people, they're paralyzed from the waist down. They might have lost an arm or they lost a hand. They're going to be severely handicapped. And of course, and back then it wasn't like the workplace wasn't making accommodations for people who had like disabilities or people who were handicapped back then. So what was there to really do? Like, what can you do when you're paralyzed from the waist down in 1918? It wasn't like, oh, you can work from a computer and not have to get up like you can today, or you can maybe you can get on YouTube and you can do stuff. Like, no, like what could you do? Like your life was almost over at that point. You know what I mean? Like that's ridiculous. And a lot of these civilians that had nothing to do with the war. That's what really gets me when people who had nothing to do with the war, had nothing to do with the circumstances that caused the war, when they get hurt and they die too because of decisions made by people in high position, like in high standing roles. You know what I mean? Like, why should somebody's innocent mother have to die or have to get hurt because of a war that she had nothing to do with? Why did the baby have to get hurt for something, for a war that they had nothing to do with? That's the thing that gets me. All the civilian casualties. Like, of course, the soldiers, they signed up for it. They knew, I mean, they knew what they were getting into. But the civilians is where it really hurts, because all these people that are just, you know what I mean? They're just casualties. They're casualties of war as well. You know what I'm saying? They're just casualties of war. That's what you can really call it.
These enormous losses eventually helped contribute to Russia's spiral into revolution and their surrender in the war early into 1917. But percentage-wise, the Allied country that suffered during the war the most, besides Serbia, was France. Most of the Western Front took place in northeastern France and Belgium, and during 4 years of fighting, 1,377,000 French soldiers gave up their lives in defense of their country, along with 340,000 civilian fatalities. This represented a loss of life for 4.3% of the entire French population, but many, many more were wounded. 4,266,000 additional French soldiers were wounded or maimed by the war, representing a total casualty amount similar to Russia's, but from a much smaller population. In total, around 15% of France's population became a casualty during the First World War. A horrible loss of life.
Like, you basically have to that's basically you basically hitting the reset button. You're losing 15% of your that's almost 1/5 of your population is affected by the war. You basically have to restart populations. Like, you have to restart bloodlines, and generations have all died in this war. You know what I mean? Because a lot of either the men had went to war and they got killed, or they came back and they were paralyzed, or they were maimed to the point where, you know what I mean? It was just, wow. Like, you basically have to hit the hard reset button on all these countries, especially like France, Russia, all these countries that had all these fatalities and casualties. Like, just, like, that's ridiculous. Like, you go to, like, just imagine being a woman and you kiss your husband before he goes off to war, and you didn't know that would be the last time that you kiss your husband. And then, so you get a letter in the mail, or you get somebody knock on your door. Miss Smith, we have to sorry to inform you that your husband has passed and your husband has died in the war. Like, how? Then now you have to be a widower, a single mother. Like, what was it? Like, bruh, I can't, man. I couldn't. To me personally, I couldn't go to war, man. I personally couldn't do it. I personally couldn't. Like, I don't know. I just couldn't. Like I said, I respect tremendously every soldier, male or female, that has defended the country, who has sacrificed their life. Like, especially the soldiers, the people who were in the military in my family. Like, I just respect everyone who even has the bravery to do it. You know what I mean? Like, just knowing, like, just having the bravery to do it is so commendable. You know what I mean? I really tip my hat to everyone who has served in some type of army. You know what I mean? Like, just wow. You know what I'm saying? You're a very brave individual.
That wouldn't be fully recovered 20 years later at the start of the Second World War. Other Entente countries in order of wartime casualties include Romania, which also suffered terribly at 10.4% of their population becoming casualties, as well as Greece, Belgium, Portugal, Montenegro, and Japan, with only about 1,000 casualties during the entire war. But now let's take a look at the other side, the Central Powers, which were led by Germany. Germany was fighting on two fronts for most of the war and also suffered cataclysmic losses. 2,037,000 of her soldiers died fighting in the west and the east, and 594,000 of her civilians died largely due to starvation caused by the Allied blockade of the country. Another 2.5 million German soldiers were wounded during the course of the war, amounting to 7.8% of Germany's population becoming a casualty. While Germany suffered the highest raw numbers of the Central Powers casualties, she didn't suffer the highest percentage-wise. While Austria-Hungary took less casualties overall, they represented a higher proportion of that empire's population, 10.77%. Over 1.3 million soldiers were killed and another 3.6 million injured, all of which helps to explain why the Austro-Hungarian Empire itself wasn't able to survive the war. But the worst suffering on the Central Powers side occurred inside of the Ottoman Empire, and most of it was self-inflicted. The Ottomans joined the war in 1915 and suffered 548,000 military fatalities and another 582,000 wounded fighting against mostly the British, French, and the Russians. But absurdly high civilian deaths inside of the Ottoman Empire were largely due to the Ottoman government's policy of ethnic cleansing against her Armenian, Greek, and Assyrian ethnic minorities. Collectively,
That's terrible. Ethnic cleansing. Like, this is like, listen, don't take a lot of these, to me, like, how can you really tell when, like, listen, this is not me being stereotypical or me being racist in any sort of way, but a lot of the people in Syria, I mean, in the Ottoman Empire, in the Middle East, have similar skin tones. You know what I mean? Like, of all the people that I've seen that are Middle Eastern, a lot of those people have similar skin. I guess they were by the language you spoke, because a lot of those people had similar skin tones. Like an Arab and an Iranian has similar skin tones. They might be darker skinned, closer to my skin complexion, or they might be very lighter skinned. But just the idea of that, like you see something so wrong in people that you have to cleanse them. They're a cancer to your society, bro. That's I understand if you don't agree with people, but you're gonna exterminate them. You're gonna mass murder just based on how you feel about a person. Like this.
known as the Armenian Genocide, 1.5 million Armenians were systematically killed by the Ottoman government during and shortly after the war, along with 600,000 Greeks and 225,000 Assyrians. Accounting for all of this, in addition to the military casualties, an enormous 17% of the Ottoman Empire's population was killed or wounded during the conflict, which can also help to explain why this empire too didn't survive long after the war was over. And finally, Bulgaria was another member of this alliance that suffered greatly as well, with 6.8% of their population becoming casualty victims of the Great War. In total, and across all countries, about 9 million soldiers lost their lives, as well as 7 million civilians. 36% of all deaths were Entente military, 22% were the Central Powers military, another 22% were Central Powers civilians, and the final 20% were Entente civilians. The First World War.
So 42% of the total deaths and casualties were civilians. 42% of deaths were civilian deaths. What does that tell you about the moral state of the people who are in charge? 42% of the casualties and deaths and all that were civilian deaths. Were civilians. Just like they said, the Allied blockade. Oh, we're gonna starve your country to death. Hey, we're gonna starve your country. We're gonna starve your country. We're gonna stop essential supplies to going not to the soldiers, but to the civilians, to the regular people that were not fighting. You're gonna starve them people to death. You're gonna starve single women and babies and little children to death. All in an effort to win a war.
War was and still remains the bloodiest war ever fought in the history of the United Kingdom, France, Italy, Belgium, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Turkey, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. The Second World War was actually not as bad for all of these mentioned countries, but it would be worse for others like Russia and Germany. Hopefully, after two terrible lessons during the 20th century, humanity will never forget what can happen when we let our differences get the better of us. Lessons of any kind are valuable for both societies and for individuals. And if you made it all the way through this video to here, it's clear that you enjoy learning. So why not learn even more about anything you want to by going over to Skillshare next? One of the most common questions that I get asked all the time is how I got started making these videos. And the first step was in the team behind Kurzgesagt, but the best channel and
Okay, but yeah, but now if a world war is more likely to happen in the midst of all this, this would be crazy. I know if you don't know, if you're not from the United States, the northeastern United States, around where I'm at, we're supposed to get where we're getting temperatures in the 30s and the 40s. And we're supposed to be getting snow. Last time I checked, it is May 11th. This is supposed to be spring, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. I might have my seasons wrong, but we're supposed to get snow, and it's below freezing in May. What? Are you serious? Are you serious? Is there an explanation for this? You know, some people might believe that this is representative of the second coming of Christ. Some people might say that this is the result of the government turning on the weather machines. I mean, I don't know. But this is just a really weird explanation that it's snowing. It's snowing in May, bro. This is the middle of May, and it's snowing. Oh, we're having a random cold front. It's colder than all the cold. It's one of the most unseasonably cold months ever. Like, why is it snowing in May? Like, can somebody please explain to me why is it snowing in May? Why is it snowing in Philly? Why is it snowing in the New England? Why is it snowing? This is in the middle of May. It's supposed to be 70 degrees. It was just 70 degrees last week. And now we get snow the next week? What is going on? What is going on? Like, what is going on? Like, who's trying to, is somebody trying to tell us something? I don't understand. Anyway, thank you again for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new to the channel. If you haven't checked out the Fallen of World War II video, which is very similar to this video, I will leave a card. There should be a card up there in the description somewhere. If not, I'll link it in the description. Anyway, thank you again for watching. Turn on my post notifications so that you don't miss an upload. Also, turn on the also share the video where we share videos at. Thank you for watching. Have a great day. Stay on the grind. I'm out. Peace.